Welcome to the Retire with Confidence podcast, your go-to podcast for all things retirement planning and financial well-being. Join us as we delve into topics such as financial planning strategies, navigating taxes and investments, maximizing Social Security benefits, and even exploring personal health and wellness tips. Get ready to gain valuable insights and empower yourself to retire with confidence.
Welcome back to the Retire with Confidence podcast. As always, I am your host, Dave Zaegel. And today's episode is brought to you by CWOs for Hire, which is the retirement planning firm that I co-own. We are now finally past the tax return deadline. We've gotten a lot of client meetings out of the way. And so we are now open back up to bringing on new clients. So if you are looking for help with your retirement planning, you can go to cwosforhire.com. and book a time directly on our calendar. Use the book a meeting link that's right there on the website. And I'd be happy to talk with you and answer any questions you have and see if you are somebody that could use our help and if we're a good fit to work together over the long term. Today, let's talk about Monte Carlo simulations. They get overused, in my opinion. And I say that as a recovering user. I used to use Monte Carlo quite a bit in the analysis because there's a lot of mathematical reasons to use it. The challenge is, in my opinion, and I'll explain why, it's not very practically helpful when looking at retirement planning because it's very difficult to take that percentage and apply it in any way that's meaningful to how best to plan for retirement. So I'll give you an example. Well, first, let's back up and talk about what Monte Carlo analysis is. So it really came more out of, you'll see it used a lot in engineering, for example. So what this does is it takes a whole bunch of variables and it runs multiple simulations. By multiple, I mean think 10,000 different simulations. So in the financial planning world, what you will see a lot of times is if we're looking at a retirement analysis, it will say, okay, what's the assumed rate of return, rates of inflation? And then it's going to look back historically at different rates of return and run thousands of different simulations of different rates of return and different orders of different rates of return, because actually the order of rates of return matters quite a bit. But it's going to scramble up all these different scenarios, thousands of them, and say, okay, we've run 10,000 different scenarios. Running another 10,000 isn't going to change the output. With these 10,000, we can say, here is the percentage chance of you achieving exactly this goal. If you're an engineer and you're trying to say, build a bridge, you need a 0% chance of failure, right? You don't want this bridge coming down at all, ever, under any circumstance. In the financial planning world, you don't need 100% certainty. And that's really where part of the challenge comes into play. So let's use an example. Let's say we've run this Monte Carlo simulation, and we've shown that based upon all the inputs, you have a 90% chance of achieving your goal, which is phenomenal, by the way. 90% chance is great. But what often happens is people will look at that and say, I have a 90% chance, great. What's this other 10%? What do we do about that? Because people were looking at that and thinking, this 10% means that I'm homeless in 5 years and somebody has to take care of me in retirement, which is not the case at all. What in this case that means is that there's this 10% window where maybe the market doesn't treat us very well. And we have to make some small adjustments along the way to get to a successful retirement. Meaning, let's say, and I'm throwing out numbers, this is not exact, but let's say we were planning on $6,000 a month of income and the market doesn't do well. Maybe we need to back off to $5,500 a month of income, right? Your retirement's not ruined. It just means that in that 10%, you didn't achieve exactly what you wanted. It's a little bit less, but you're not ruined. And so that's where a lot of the thoughts around Monte Carlo analysis get difficult, because how do you look at 90% compared to 83%, compared to 96, compared to 75? What do those numbers mean? What can we do with them? That's where Monte Carlo analysis can really get tripped up, because it doesn't translate exactly to what do we need to do for retirement planning. It's not that it has no use. It's just that it's very difficult to translate into actionable items. That's why if you're a regular listener to this podcast, you hear us talking about guardrails. You hear us talking about structuring investments for at least 5 years of income so that way the rest can grow. You hear us talk about tax planning. Those are all actionable items. So we can say, hey, we're structuring it this way. Here's our guardrails so we know when we have to change something. And here's what we're going to do for tax planning. We're also going to talk about Social Security income, all these different strategies that are all actionable items so that we know what income can we have in retirement, how much it's going to be taxed, and when, if ever, do we need to make any changes. That's much more useful than saying your Monte Carlo is 87%. What does that even mean? Who knows? And I bring all this up because there's so many online calculators that are out there that give people this number. And a lot of times people assume that they have to get to 100%, which makes sense. Everybody wants 100%. Who wants the 10% we talked about previously, where you might have to cut back a little bit? Here's the rub, though. 100% by itself is not necessarily the goal, and it's not even necessarily a good thing. It can be a good thing if you have just a ton saved up to where there's almost no chance of you ever running out of money. So let's say you've saved up $8 million and you're living on $200,000 a year. There is almost no scenario where you run out of money. You can stick that $8 million in a CD getting regular interest, and you're going to have enough money to retire on. It's just, that is your 100%, because you have built up so much assets relative to the income that you need and want. There's just no chance of you running out of money unless, something just disastrous beyond imagine has to happen. Maybe you get sued for 10 million or something. Really, it takes just an absolute disaster for that to not work out for you. Under any other reasonable circumstance, you will not run out of money. And that's 100%. So here's the challenge with trying to fit your retirement planning to exactly 100% if you're not in that scenario of just having so many assets built up that you'll never have any chance of running out of money. The problem with trying to get to 100% is that the input has to fit that. Meaning, if let's say you have $1 million of assets for retirement, to get to 100%, the money that you take out has to be at a low enough level. Well, why not instead say, okay, I want a little bit more income with the understanding that if things don't go as ideally as planned, then I back off to a lower amount. There's no reason to start at the lower amount just to achieve a 100% Monte Carlo analysis. Let's start a little bit higher with the understanding of when and if something happens, what do we need to do? That's where we go back to the guardrails that we've talked about many times before, where we say, okay, we're going to start with this because we know that this income works. If the market goes down to a certain level on us, then we can make a temporary adjustment and let it come back over time and then resume our normal level of income. Versus if all we're trying to do is say, I'm so scared that I want to make sure I have 100% certainty all the time, I'm going to take this lower amount. Now we've lost that possibility of getting some higher amount over time because we're so focused on 100% certainty at all times. We're losing out on income that we could be taking and enjoying in retirement. So don't focus simply on trying to get to 100% Monte Carlo analysis, absolute certainty. You actually wind up limiting the amount of income that you get in retirement, or working a whole lot longer than you really need to, if instead we can put together the analysis that says, here's what we can do, If our balance drops below this, we can make this temporary adjustment, let it come back, and then resume our higher income. That's a much, much better way to approach it versus trying to just say, I need 100% absolutely certain all the time. Because, like I said, you're going to have less income, or you're going to be working a whole lot longer, or both. No need for either of those, because you can make adjustments along the way using dynamic distributions. Planning out taxes, that's a huge piece, because if you're going to reduce your tax bill over time by looking at when do you pay taxes at lower rates, that can provide a tremendous boost to your income. So there's so many other pieces to be looking at when we talk about retirement planning. Please don't focus simply on this Monte Carlo analysis, and please don't have 100% as your absolute goal. If you says 90%, you're fine. You're totally fine. Even if it says probably something in the 80s, you're probably fine. And maybe even the 70s percentage range. You can still be fine understanding what income will work and what adjustments will need to be made along the way, if any.